for setting the bar so low. So the future of CSS, because what we're writing isn't CSS. So can I get a little light in here to actually see you all? So can you please raise your hand if you use a preprocessor or a postprocessor? So that's pretty much, I'll just ask, who does not use a preprocessor or postprocessor? So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, I think. So actually, let me turn the whole thing on. Actually, the present of CSS isn't CSS. It's preprocessors and postprocessors. And we're going to dive into that deep today. But first off, hi, I'm Roy, and I'm a Sassaholic. Or as some say, the original Sasshole. If you want to call me out on anything I say today because it's just plain wrong and doesn't fit the CSS Day theme, please mention me. I'm, well, Roy on Twitter. I have a mailing list that gets crazy Sass going on. You can sign up at advancedsass.com. And my slides are available at roy.io/futurecss. And there you also find a link to the demo code I'm about to show off. And I work for a company called AppSignal. So first, before getting into Sass, I want to talk about preprocessors versus postprocessors. A lot of people seem to use those terms interchangeably, as if they're the same, and they're very much not. They're very much different. So what's in a name? First of all, post-processing does not exist. When you write a file, a Sass file, or something that's going to be post-processed, and then you're going to run the file to build something during build time, that means you're pre-processing something. So post-processing does not exist. Yet, I'll use the regular definitions for pre-processing and post-processing just so we don't get all too confused. So first, preprocessors extend the CSS specification. You can write your CSS, and it's just CSS, and then you can use Sass or less or stylus or something else to add some magic sprinkles like mix-ins and custom functions and variables, and you immediately see that what you're using is either Sass or plain CSS. When opening a Sass file, you know the CSS is going to remain CSS, and this weird code over here is going to get turned into CSS, hopefully. There's no confusion between the two. Post-processors, on the other hand, have the ability to modify the CSS specification. Basically, you write something that looks like CSS, or actually is CSS, which then is compiled into different CSS. So it's fairly implicit, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. Like the great tools like PostCSS with its plugins, CSS Next, Auto Prefixer, of course. And a large difference is that preprocessors are largely auto-documenting because of this. You see what's going on, or you may need some documentation for using a post-processor when you're not doing it quite right. So a silly example, let's say you have a color you want to replace in your document for some reason based on some logic. So in Sass, you could have a custom replace color function. It takes a single argument, in this case a color red, and will be replaced by, for instance, blue. You could also write a post-CSS plugin to do this for you. Then you could just type color red, run this through the post-CSS plugin, and that will be changed into color blue. Yeah, that's going to be an issue. That's going to be an issue for the Next developer who has no clue what's going on the water. Just to remind you, the Next developer is going to be you in 3 months' time. So this is, if you don't do it right, post-processors can be a burden on your team and on your future development and your maintainability. That said, they both serve their time and purpose. It's totally fine to take your preprocessor, write something, then feed it into the post-processor, because they both just speak CSS. And then the output will be CSS you actually need. So post-processors are great for adding vendor prefixes, for linting, cross-browser compatibility, progressive enhancement, while preprocessors are great at reusing, creating reusable code, reusable elements, and creating abstractions on top of existing CSS concepts. So it's okay to use both, as long as you write intention-revealing CSS. At a first glance, when opening a Sass file, you should be able to see, or any file that's going to be pre or post-processed. At first glance, you should be able to see this what's going on, this is plain CSS, this will be modified, and then prefixes and things like that. We don't care about that because we need them, and we won't be needing them in the near future anyway. When you're new to using pre-processors and post-processors, I encourage you to look at your generated CSS once in a while, because you can take 10 lines of Sass and create 1,000 lines of CSS with it. Nowadays, there are people who start learning front end by learning Sass instead of learning CSS. Yes, that's a bad thing. Sass is a tool and not the core language. It's an extension to the core language. And when you can, leverage the power of native CSS. Like the calc function, as discussed this morning, is great. It's wonderfully powerful, and it cannot be replicated in a preprocessor or a postprocessor, because we need to get those values at runtime. So use native CSS where you can. If you want to use Flexbox, please do, because the time is ready for it, and it's better to use Flexbox than come up with your own custom solution in Sass. That said, variables are old news. Variables used to be awesome because they landed in Sass, and then they landed in CSS. So they're not interesting anymore. So instead, this talk is about programming in your CSS. This is not about using Sass as some polyfill to add vendor prefixes. It's not about explaining what a mixin is, or a custom function, or a variable. If you don't know, please ask your neighbor, but everyone has used Sass here anyway, so you're bound to know already. This is about programming in your CSS. And maybe not per the traditional definition, but to me, CSS is a machine language. I have a love-hate relationship with CSS. I love the awesome things you can do with CSS. I love doing that with Sass. I do not like repeating myself by creating longer and longer selectors, which I won't go 3 levels deep anyway, but still, I like the nesting aspect. I don't want to repeat myself by using the same color 30 times. I want to use a variable there. So I've been using Sass for 8 years, and I now know kind of how the compiler behaves. So I know if I use this Sass code, it will compile into this CSS code, which will either be performant or non-performant. But I don't read my CSS in general. I'm just too annoyed by the language. So to me, Sass was a savior of for getting things interesting again, to get me back interested in writing CSS code. Because creativity trumps repetition. I don't want to be copy and pasting the selectors, etc., etc. I want to have a computer handle the repetitive tasks. I want a computer to use loops, control structures. Let's say you have complex animations. We'll be looking at some in a bit. I want those keyframes to be calculated and generated by a computer and not doing the math myself. And configuration is better than search and replace. I don't want this one color. I want to replace it, do a search and replace in my project. Let's say I have 10 animations on the page that are somewhat in sync. So one runs for 20 seconds, and the second one starts 8 seconds in, etc. And then someday I wake up and I feel, well, this doesn't feel right. This should be 12% slower. That's what we do, because design in the browser and stuff. I want to change some global variable, and then have that change trickle down, and you do all the stuff automatically. When I have a website that uses a left to right layout and I need to switch it to right to left, I don't want to do that manually. I want to be able to change a single variable, and then have Sass handle that for me. So I can have a single code base for both left to right and right to left layouts. So I can just work on my CSS, this one code base, and the only things that need to switch around will be switched around automatically. And most importantly, fun is better than frustration. Writing CSS should be fun. And you can let your creativity run free while using Sass or another preprocessor, because you have all these tools, these loops, control structures, to make crazy stuff. That doesn't mean that you should use Sass for all the things. Again, your CSS should be intention revealing. But it's great to just go out and build crazy stuff that you're never ever going to use. It will get your brain in a mindset that makes it easier to write production code. When you run into an issue, it's easier to come up with a less creative solution because you've already seen the creative one and know the upsides and the downsides of using that one. And Sass is great for non-developers too. Both CSS and Sass have a fairly limited syntax. And it's great for instance, people in universities doing research to visualize research data, to animate research data, to create interactive presentations by using some light programming that's really easy to learn to visualize the stuff they've been working on for a long time. So let's have some fun with Sass. Let's go to the code, but not without a word of warning. The following code was copy and pasted by trained monkeys. Do not try this at home. The code you're about to see fits in either one of three categories. The first one is going to be fun stuff, smart, I should use it in production. The second category is going to be that's a great proof of concept, we should build upon that for production code. The third category is going to be this is batshit crazy and stupid. Do not ever use this in production or anywhere else because some of this code will actually crash your machine. No, really. So I'm going to do a crazy thing here. I'm going to kill my keynote and then mirror my desktop and go to a Is it okay in the back? People in first row saying, yeah. So someone once told me, or many people told me, if there's one thing that can go wrong, it will go wrong during a presentation that's live coding. But apparently someone put in a magic comment that should be replaced by magic code or something, I don't know. Could have been me. So I'm going to do the crazy thing and just type Sass here because what could possibly go wrong with 300 people just looking at your every move. So this ties in nicely with what Clarissa was discussing earlier. So we're back to working with color in Sass. And we're going to modify you. Not you, but you. And so this is a color circle. And I was working at a project where we had a situation of having a graph with lines. And they started off with 4 lines and then became 10 lines that needed to have distinctive colors, which were as far apart of each other as possible. So those 10 colors need to be evenly distributed across the color wheel. And that's something you can do in Sass fairly easily in just a few lines of code. So here I have 100 swatches. And then HTML for this looks like this. So it's a bunch of diffs with class name swatch-0 up to 99. So what do you, and here's some CSS that just sets like the default for the boxes. If the class name starts with swatch, then give it this dimensions, etc. So what do we need to know? We need to know the number of colors first off. So let's add that. So let's say we want 3 colors. Then we need to know how many ints. You know how many degrees we need to rotate. So that's going to be 360 divided by the count. Still following? Yeah. Cool. And let's say we're going to start at 0 degrees in the color wheel, which is red, right on top at the 0 degrees position. The beauty is we can just use red, the named color, because under the hood, Sass will just take that one, convert it into a Sass color object, which can then do crazy stuff with, get RGB, HSL, values, etc., etc. So loops. Loops are the one of the best things in Sass because you can output a lot of CSS that you don't have to write by hand with just a few lines of code. So let's say that for I from 0 to count. So this says we're going to go from 0 to 3, which means up to and including 2, because we're starting at 0. And then that number will be in the I variable. So let's first create a selector, swatch dash. Following along? So this creates dot swatch dash 0, 1, 2, 3, etc. Let's set a background color. This adjust U function that popped up in one of the slides that Clarissa showed. This will this one of the fun color functions in Sass that will take a value, a starting color. So let's say our start color red, and then rotates the color wheel by a certain number of degrees. So we're at the current position we're at, I, multiplied by the number of degrees per iteration. That worked. Thank you, thank you. So this just takes 3 colors. So we've 3 iterations, 0, 120, and 240 degrees. The beauty of this function is if you keep going, if you go back to 370, for instance, that just works because Sass just says, well, that's 360 plus 10, no problem. There are 3 swatches. Let's say we need 25. By just changing this one variable, you can do stuff like this. You can do a whole rainbow if you say we want 100. Get 100 unique colors. There's no way you could do this so quickly and so efficiently by hand in CSS. Who disagrees? Smart move. So this is a great and simple way to effectively modify the hue of a starting color. Fun use case. A minute ago, I spoke about using, let me open the correct file, about using right to left layouts. So this is the CSS Day website. Let me just zoom out a bit so you see more of it. The program page. This was done left to right, obviously. Now let's say CSS Day backs up its bags and moves to a country where people read from right to left. Well, what you could do yes, let me find the correct file. You can just change the direction on the HTML element from LTR to RTL. And then some things flip around, but not everything. If you want to do this right using just this one direction property, you need to take this layout change into account beforehand. So you can't use float left. You can't use absolute positioning with left and right. You'll have to use inline blocks or flex blocks or things like that to switch things around and not explicitly say this is left or right. Yet, obviously, this is something you can easily fix with Sass. So I'm about to set the record for the quickest change of a whole website from left to right to right to left. So first I set a variable, direction. I just set that to right to left. And I created just a tiny library, basically, with a few functions. So the first 2 just check if something is left to right based on if the direction variable equals LTR. If you're unfamiliar with the if function, this is Sass's ternary operator. So you evaluate something. If true, return the first thing. If false, return the second thing. So if direction equals left to right, return true. Otherwise, return false. This one the other way around. Then there's an interesting one for shorthand values. So you have margin top right, bottom left. And when you switch your layout around, you want to switch the right and left arguments. So the second and fourth argument needs to be switched around. So that's what this one does. It accepts 4 values. As you can see, index 4 moves to index 2, and index 2 moves to index 4. And there are opposites. If you feed that left, it's going to return right, and the other way around. So we need some, the quickest way to do this is just filthy for search and replace. I need to do 2 replacements because one of them is going to be inside properties. So that's going to be something that looks like this, like left. And then we use some interpolation. That should work. So this is padding left when your direction is going to be left to right. And based on the variable, the global dir variable, if you set that one to right to left, this is going to output right. So you're going to get padding right. You have left like this, of course. Let me just first do the right ones too. Like there's nothing better than copy-paste programming. So replacing more stuff. So change, wow, see, no more live coding. Now what, I'm switching to the precompiled file. There you go. So this one actually works. Yeah, I've prepared well because I know this is going to happen, of course. So this replaced all the lefts with rights, and there's going to be a margin somewhere that uses the shorthand. So for this one, we need to switch the 0 with the 0.5 EM. So let's make a long story short. Change this to right to left. Hope the thing compiles. There you go. So this is the original, and this is the thing switched around entirely. See the difference? So not exactly everything is switched around, not just the text direction, but all margins, all paddings, etc. And I could have done this really fast if you weren't watching. No, for real. Now still, you can do this in 10 minutes by paying attention to what's going well and what's going wrong. Now let's say I want to have these 2 variations because I have 2 websites that look the same, except one is going to left to right, other right to left. I could just create 2 different Sass files and call one of them left and the other one right. In that one, just set this variable and then import this base.scss file. Then you have 2 files that take the exact same input and generate 2 separate output files. I've worked on right to left websites, and this does wonders. Anyone here working on right to left stuff? 1, 2, 3, 4, a few. Do you use Sass to manage any of this? No. Because you hate Sass. Oh, okay, no JavaScript. I don't know JavaScript at all. So right to left, fun stuff. I want to talk about extents a bit. And an architecture some people use. I'm not sure if I'm a fan, but it's a fun thing to explore, in which we use Sass to combine semantic class names from HTML and combine them with presentational placeholder names in Sass. Let me show you how that looks. So you have this wonderful design. On H1, some introduction text, which is red, and then there's something that's pulled out, this quote on the right, and a blog post at the bottom that has some box styling. So what it looks like are these placeholders in Sass, and those could be based or part of your living style guide. So all these elements in your style guide could be a placeholder in Sass. So we have a box with certain settings, as well as a media query nested in there. Something could be highlighted, like the red introduction text. Something could be pulled out, like a quote we have here. And you can have an alternative font. And then that is glued together like this. So the class names are purely descriptive, introduction, a testimonial, or a blog post. And then they extend placeholders that describe what it's going to look like. So this is being used in the wild. And depending on how you've structured your projects and your style guide, this could work very well, I guess. You could also do this slightly differently and spice things up with programming. So the same thing, only now there's a configuration map that has key value pairs of a selector on the left and the placeholders need to extend on the right. So for the introduction, we extend the highlight and alternative font placeholders. Fun fact, in Sass, you can create a string dynamically, like we do here in this loop, for this extend by taking the %sign that says this is going to be a placeholder, then append a string to it, like highlight or box or pool, and then the combination of the two will be evaluated as the name for a placeholder. So this way you can clean things up a little by not writing actual CSS, basically creating a DSL, a domain-specific language that you use to dynamically generate your CSS based on a configuration map. So I came up with a different solution. I think we can spice things up and do this a even more stupid way. But before that, we need to take a look at ASCII art. Oh, I love ASCII art. Rachel talked about it briefly in combination with the grid module. I want to show you what you can do with some ASCII art. Well, this is a rocket that flies across the screen. I'll just do it again because it's a rocket that flies across the screen. So the source for this looks like this. Yes, it is what you think it is. This takes the uses these axes to determine where to put the rocket in an animation. So if I yank this one out, put this on the right, hope the file compiles, run it again, you'll see it go there. Loop it, keep going. Then I figured this is fun, but no rocket flies upright. So you can do this. There is only one logical solution to doing this, which is with Sass. There's going to be UTF-8 arrows. I really don't know why you just didn't get that solution. So I'll just go over the code real quick. So this looks like ASCII art, but in reality it isn't. As you see, it's encapsulated with by the grid variable. This is just a Sass list, a list of 10 items, and each item is a 40-character long string. And one of those items, one of those characters in the string is not going to be a space, but an arrow. That makes it a bit easier to grasp, maybe. So the few things we need to do to set this up, we need to get the grid width, and we assume that all columns are going to be, all rows are going to be the same width, which is 40 characters. So I just take the length, the string length of the first item in that list, and assume that the rest is also 40 characters wide. And then some calculation to make the whole thing responsive. Take the column width, which is 100% divided by the number of columns, and the row height is going to be 100% divided by the number of items in this grid. From there is going to be some keyframes, always starting at the top left position. And then for each row in the grid, loop over each row, so do this 10 times. And then there's a custom index of character function that does something that's pretty nasty, because for the X, you can just get the index for the X appearing in that string. With an arrow, it can be one of 8 characters, so it can be anything really. So I solved this a dirty way by just slicing the string 40 times. This string has 40 items, 40 columns, and then go through each column, see if it's a space. If it isn't a space, it has to be an arrow. And then going to return both the column position, so where is the arrow going to be horizontally, as well as the actual character. And the character is then run through a Sass map. And because UTF-8 is UTF-8, you can just use those UTF-8 arrows as keys for your Sass map. And this then returns the degree of rotation. And from there, it's pretty straightforward. And yes, you could probably have done this by hand in CSS, and it may have been a quicker solution. Unless you want to move stuff around and change those arrows and move them to a different position. And by then, this definitely is the fastest way to build stupid animations in Sass you never ever are going to use in production. So that's rockets. Now circling back to the extend stuff we were looking at earlier. So let me close some windows here and find the correct one. Extend architecture by using a grid, obviously. Where are you? Where are you? There you are. This is doing the same thing as before. But now we're doing it like this. So we're applying the logic for the rocket animation to something like this. So horizontally, we have those CSS selectors we want to have placeholders extended on. And then vertically, we have all the things you can actually extend, like box or highlight or pool, which are the placeholders. And then by putting a little X in the column for each placeholder you want to extend for each selector, this just generates your CSS. So my introduction is this red text. Maybe you also want to have it in a box. No problem. I can just put an X in here. Will be in a box. Maybe you want the blog post text to be red as well. Just put a little X in here. It's going to be red. This is super easy. So we've always been reluctant to have backend developers touch our HTML and CSS. They were like, we're going to do the CSS, and you can just only use class names in the HTML. No more of that. They cannot touch the HTML. They cannot touch the CSS. They can only touch one single configuration file that has a markdown-like style table you can use to put little X's in to link living style guide elements to HTML elements. Although that may not be the best idea, like I think of it now. But anyway, do with it as you please. The Sass is surprisingly easy. It's only this, because this is just, it looks like SKR, but really isn't. So this is going to be a list with multiple items. I just added more spaces so it looks like tabular data, but it's just a list with 4 items. Again, there's a list of 5 items. Just a matter of going over this and looping through it and check if there's an X in this string, then do something. This code is on GitHub and linked to from the slides, so you can just look this up later if you want to. So this is a crazy but creative way to create a CSS DSL that you probably don't want to use like for real. But it's a great thought experiment to come to creative solutions, learn more about Sass, learn more about the power of Sass, and also learn what things not to do. Because obviously, by putting X's everywhere and just adding selectors, you could add 1 selector and 5 X's, and you'd be adding like 200 lines of CSS to your code in 1 line of Sass. But then, other fun stuff. So maybe you shouldn't want to do this. But earlier I mentioned that Sass and CSS are great to animate scientific data, for instance. So let's see sunrise. So we have 12 months, and the sun rises at a certain time in the morning and sets at a certain time in the evening, and I want to visualize that like in one view. So let's find that one. See the time bottom left corner, or not because it's cut off. Just move the screen a little. Run that again. So it was January up to December. Sun up, sun down. As you see in November, this illustrates really well that daylight savings time ends, because in November, the sun sets like way quicker than in October. Visualized research data. Research data is me going to some website with data about the sunrise and sunset and copy paste that, obviously. But in a fun way. So this takes a map of months and then times for sun up and sun down, just like you'd regularly write down a moment in time, hour, column, minutes. Then it's simply a matter of creating a list of 1,440 items, one list item or one map item for each minute in a day, so we can calculate what percentage of the day we're at a certain time. So for noon, 12:00, that's going to be 50%. We need that information for the animation keyframes. And from there, again, it's going to be looping some stuff, copy-pasting some stuff, praying it works, pray some more, drink alcohol, and fixed. What's more interesting here was my issue with the time at the bottom left corner. So I want to animate the time. See down there. So this is a before pseudo element. There's a lot of things you can animate, but not the content property. So how does one solve that? Well, it's actually just, in the end, it's all CSS, obviously. Just take a look at the compiled CSS, because I'm pretty happy with my crazy awesome solution. So you just take, say, it's all monospace, so a huge string of all those hours. And then instead of animating the text, we just animate the text indent, which you can animate, and just keep adding -5 characters to it. You may clap now while I sip my water. And I don't want to do all this calculation by hand, like all these percentages. That's just crap. That's not fun to do. So if you find yourself needing to animate a content property, this could be a solution for you. So visualizing research data. So that's fun, but I like crazy stuff better. So let's do something with the Sass logo. Oh, look, that folder is called ASCII art. So this is the Sass logo. So this is one element with multiple box shadows. So each dot is a single box shadow with a certain positioning. Which then looks like this. And you just loop through the thing and add dots and do stuff and do more stuff. Actually, it's very little Sass. In the end, you have box shadows, and box shadows, and box shadows. In fact, you have 95,214 characters of box shadow. So this file is going to be 95 kilobytes. That's nothing. I want to take the same ASCII art and convert it into a 1 megabyte CSS file. Why? Sorry? Yeah, I'm going to use Sass. I actually can't modify the file because I'm using CodeKit right now to compile this stuff. I'm going to show you right now, if I run that through CodeKit, the thing will first crash and then hang my computer. Because, well, Sass, I guess. Same thing. And this time, we're creating SVG using JavaScript in Sass. So we're writing our JavaScript in Sass, creating a huge list of where each item is going to be something that we need executed in JavaScript. So each of the lines will be we'll have a semicolon after it during evaluation. So we set things up, and then for each dot, we just add JavaScript stuff, SVG stuff. Then just merge it all together and put the whole thing in a content property for a before pseudo element on the body element. Now our CSS looks like this. So this is 901,970 columns. It's over 900,000 characters of JavaScript in Sass. So I want to do this in Sass primarily and use like real JavaScript as little as possible. Of course, a simple solution is just get that string using getComputedStyle, then do some substringing to get like rid of the quotes before and after, and just run it through eval, because that's totally secure. So with slightly lying 2 lines of JavaScript, I actually created a SVG thingy using Sass. And it works, and there's no reason you should not be doing this for your production sites. After that, you can call me for consultancy, because I will fix the shit for you. And I think we have about 5 minutes left for doing stuff at your office, right?
Are you done?
Yeah.
Good. Well, as you know, I'm a big person about HTML5, and I find that native environments like Apple's iOS and Android limit you as a developer in your imagination. Now I think they have a point. You're like Matthias Beinens at other conferences. You're like, why do you show this stuff to people? What's wrong with you?
People can make an informed decision.
It's wonderful, yeah. It's great. Like if you don't know JavaScript or processing, you can use all of these things. Yeah, makes sense. We have questions here for you, and I love it because I waited for the first mansplaining type code that comes in where it says like, obviously. You're obviously a fan of automating things, yet you use CodeKit instead of some more powerful options. Why?
Ease of use for these kind of things like demos and things like that. Like in regular actual projects, I'd be using Rails, and then we just use the asset pipeline and use the still use the Ruby Sass compiler. In other projects, I would just use libsass for speed, etc., as long as I can work around its few quirks and bugs. But for demoing and workshops and things like this, clear error messages on screen, CodeKit works great.
That was even the other question, Ruby Sass or libsass, and why?
Libsass when you can, otherwise Ruby Sass.
Okay, obviously. Isn't nesting media queries within extended placeholders illegal in Sass 3? You didn't think of that one, did you?
No.
The Sass police will be so on your ass.
No. No, it works because the code compiled. This is the latest Sass version I'm using here. There's an issue with... I gotta get back to that later. There's an issue with nesting media queries in a certain context, but it's not this one. Or at least not now. I'm not sure about future versions, but I haven't heard anything about a breaking change that will disable this. But I'm going to look into it and then tweet about it and see if they can retweet it or something.
Okay. One question that is actually one that I had as well. What is Roy's position? That wasn't the question. On Sass turning CSS into more of a programming language and making it harder to get into for newbies. Because CSS was simple of sorts by design.
Yeah.
And now we make it into like this bastard redhead child of JavaScript and processing to do things like that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's nice that we can do it, but do you think we're over-relying on these kind of things and that way stopping new developers from understanding the beauty of CSS?
Yeah, definitely. So we have 2 problems. One of them is new developers starting out with Sass instead of CSS, which makes them think that Sass is CSS. And I believe that you need a thorough understanding of CSS itself before starting to use Sass. What's the question again? Because I had a second point to make.
Well, it was about newbies starting.
Oh, yeah, exactly. So this is something you shouldn't do. And the big issues I see is people who have been using CSS for years, then they discover Sass, they bring it into their projects, and they go totally overboard and do crazy stuff like this. And then their team has no idea what's going on, new developers have no idea what's going on, and they themselves 2 days later also have no idea what's going on. After a while, those people figure out that they were doing stuff wrong, and they will simplify things. So a lot of these techniques you should definitely not use. But the for loop, for instance, is great when doing a rating system. With having 10 stars, you can just loop from 1 through 10 instead of copy-pasting the whole thing. And there are many like smaller use cases, not on this scale, for which you can actually use more powerful features.
Isn't it also a part of an indication that we're still not doing a proper mixing of technology and technology knowledge? I mean, there's CSS conferences, there's JavaScript conferences, there's design conferences, instead of just having something like, you could call it frontiers, where everything gets mixed.
Yeah, I agree. So this for the past years, like it's the third CSS day, and I've been to all of them. And most speakers have had some Sass in their talks because they're using it for some specific things, but it never like stepped out of the limelight and never was featured like this right now. People use it, but don't really talk about it, and that's definitely an issue. We need some cross-pollination there.
Yeah, because there's a lot of parallelism. There's a lot of same solutions being written in Sass that are written in JavaScript, that are written in Ruby, PHP, whatever. And in essence, it could be a feature of CSS if we only talked to the spec makers or the browser makers, but it's too easy to build your own Sass mix-in and win Hacker News for the day.
So I was thinking, like, if you want to get a Hacker News for the day, you take Rachel's code, like the grid, ASCII art, which is basically something you can just copy-paste into a Sass variable and would probably be valid code, and then do crazy stuff with it and replicate this like the grid module in Sass. You can do that to a large extent, and there's no reason to do so, which is why I said leverage the power of CSS wherever you can.
So the string index in Sass, is that just a Boolean that it's in there or not, or does it return you the index like it does in JavaScript?
Yeah.
So you didn't need to split it into 40 and loop over all of them?
Well, then in that case, you need to have like this loop 8 times to find the index for each of the arrows.
Exactly. That's a much less code. It makes it much more usable. And no, wait. So in terms of like iterations and installing these kind of things, as you said, Sass and these kind of things, like for a 10-star rating, makes total sense. And we talked about this earlier at breakfast. Setting up Ruby on a Windows machine a few years ago was just like 6 years of your life you don't get back anymore.
After 3, you just go out and buy a Mac.
Yeah, of course, because everybody wants to spend these few $1,000 before they start writing their first CSS. This is what we should do. Do you think there is a virtualization more possibility for people in there as well to make these things easier? Like, I mean, we have Docker and all kind of stuff to set up very complex server environments. But do you think developer environments will come with something like that? CodeKit and stuff on Mac works, but it's fascinating that all of these things come out on the most expensive machine for the kids that have everything, rather than on a Linux machine or an old Windows box.
But there are similar solutions like preprocess, which are for Mac and Windows and Linux as well. So you have 2 kinds of tools. You have the graphical user interface tools like CodeKit, which you can't really make part of your development process. So you have this standalone program that does stuff, and you don't really want to commit your compiled CSS file. You only want to commit your source files, etc. On the one hand of the spectrum. On the other hand, people will then automate this and make sure it's part of their project, and you get like NPM modules. So it's going to be like Node Sass and things like that. That's what's being used right now to make sure it works, but then Node has some other issues like waiting for 5 hours while dependencies download.
Yeah, or use every dependency every single time because you might need it in the future and these kind of things. Well, with that, we have another break for half an hour, so we see you after this. But before that, I need 3 people, well, not before, but during. Bernhard Sturm, Michael Beil, and Coffee Media. You each won a book from O'Reilly Media by Clarissa about the stuff that she talked about because you asked questions. So asking questions is a good thing. I see you in half an hour. Don't bring anything back. Be nice to each other. Get some sun.